The night the flatbed truck crawled to a stop on the side of that desolate South Carolina road, its single functioning headlight cutting a feeble swath through the oppressive southern dark, was the night a simple universal plea for help became a death sentence. This isn't a story of a single monster, but of a calculated evil that wore the mask of southern courtesy, preying on the most basic of human vulnerabilities. It's a story that would unravel across decades, exposing a festering rot beneath the surface of a small town, and its title would be whispered with a chill: The Flat Tire Murders. Our story begins not with a body, but with a life full of promise. 23-year-old Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer was a vibrant, beloved figure in the tight-knit community of Brevard, North Carolina. With a radiant smile that could light up a room and a fiercely independent spirit, she was the kind of person who drew others in. She was an artist, a free spirit, deeply in love with her husband, Jim. Theirs was a partnership built on mutual respect and adventure. On the cold afternoon of January 2, 1997, Bobbie Jo and a friend decided to make the drive over the state line to a popular bar in upstate South Carolina. It was a simple plan, a brief escape. She kissed Jim goodbye, her car packed with art supplies for a project the next day, a mundane detail that would later feel like a gut punch. The last time he saw her, she was full of life, a vibrant splash of color against the winter gray. Meanwhile, in the same town, lived another young woman, 26-year-old Tami Faye Brandon. Tami was different from Bobbie Jo, a bit more of a wanderer, a woman trying to find her footing in the world. She worked as a waitress, known for her easy laugh and a trusting nature that friends sometimes worried was a little too generous. She was the kind of person who would stop to help a stranger, a trait that, in this specific time and place, was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. The hours ticked by. Jim Oberholtzer grew uneasy as night fell and Bobbie Jo didn't return. Phone calls went unanswered. This wasn't like her. By morning, a cold dread had solidified into panic. He reported her missing. The investigation began with the grim assumption of a car accident on the winding, mountainous roads. But then, a break. A hunter, miles from where anyone expected, found Bobbie Jo's purse in a field off a highway pullover area known as the Rocky Ridge Truck Stop in South Carolina. Inside, her ID, her money, and a single chilling artifact, a spent .25 caliber shell casing. The scene was no accident. It was a hunting ground. The search intensified, the terrain brutal and unforgiving. Days later, they found her. Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer's body was discovered in a wooded area, a quarter-mile from where her purse was found. She had been shot. The investigation had just turned into a homicide, and the fear in the community became a palpable, suffocating thing. But the horror was only beginning. Just over a month later, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, Tami Faye Brandon vanished. Her car was found abandoned on the side of another remote road, its tire flat. The parallel was immediate and terrifying. A predator was using a disabled vehicle as bait. The investigation was a maze of dead ends and mounting pressure. The only tangible link was the .25 caliber shell casing found in Bobbie Jo's purse. Ballistics would confirm it was from the same weapon used to kill her. But who owned that gun? The list of potential suspects was a revolving door of local troublemakers, but no one fit the profile of a calculated, repeat killer. The task force, led by seasoned detectives who could feel the specter of a serial offender looming, worked tirelessly. But the trail was cold. The case grew stagnant, moving from the front pages to the cold case files. The families of Bobbie Jo and Tami were left in a torturous limbo, their grief frozen, denied the closure of justice. Years turned into a decade. The world moved on, but in the foothills of the Carolinas, the shadow of the flat tire murders never fully lifted. Then, a crack in the ice. In 2005, a new investigator, Detective Steve K. Owens with the Pickens County Sheriff's Office, took a fresh look at the dusty files. He was dogged, obsessive, unwilling to let the case die. He re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined every shred of evidence, and his attention kept snagging on a name that had floated around the periphery of the investigation for years: Larry Gene Bell. Bell was a local character, a man known for his odd behavior and a disturbing habit of making obscene phone calls. He was a spider at the center of a small web of intimidation in his community. He wasn't a stranger to law enforcement, but he'd always been considered a nuisance, not a murderer. But Detective Owens saw something else. He saw a man with a deep-seated need for control, a man who reveled in the fear he instilled in others. The most compelling piece of the puzzle, however, came from an unexpected source: the phone records. Both Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer and Tami Faye Brandon had received terrifying, taunting phone calls in the hours after their disappearances. The voice on the other end was a chilling, mocking monotone. A witness who had overheard one of these calls described the voice as unforgettable. It was a voice that belonged to Larry Gene Bell. The investigation now had a laser focus. The problem was evidence. They had the shell casing, they had the phone records, but they needed something to physically place Bell with the victims. The break came from a witness who had been too frightened to come forward years earlier. This person revealed that on the night Bobbie Jo disappeared, they had seen Larry Gene Bell at the Rocky Ridge truck stop. He was driving a flatbed truck with a single working headlight. The description was a perfect match for a vehicle seen by another motorist that night. The pieces were clicking into place with terrifying speed. But the masterstroke was yet to come. Investigators, knowing Bell's propensity for obscene calls, set up a wiretap. They listened as he called one of Tami Brandon's relatives, his voice a venomous whisper. He didn't confess, but he spoke with an intimate knowledge of the crime, taunting the grieving family member. It was the voice from the original calls, the voice of a man who believed he was untouchable. The net was closing. They obtained a warrant for a voice exemplar, forcing Bell to read a transcript of the very threats he had made. The match was confirmed. Larry Gene Bell was arrested. The community exhaled a breath it had been holding for nearly a decade. The trial of Larry Gene Bell was a media circus, a long-awaited catharsis for a region haunted by his crimes. The prosecution laid out a methodical, devastating case. They presented the ballistics evidence, linking the shell casing to a .25 caliber pistol that was traced back to Bell. They presented the phone records, mapping his calls to the victims' families in a timeline of pure cruelty. But the most powerful moments came from the witness stand. Jim Oberholtzer, his face a mask of stoic grief, testified about the last time he saw his vibrant wife. A relative of Tami Brandon broke down describing the taunting, monstrous voice on the phone. The courtroom was held in a rapt, horrified silence. The defense, in a desperate move, tried to paint Bell as a simple-minded patsy, but it was a narrative that crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Bell himself sat through the proceedings, his expression unreadable, a stark contrast to the raw emotion flooding the room. The prosecution saved its most cinematic piece of evidence for last. They played the recording of the voice exemplar. In the sterile silence of the courtroom, Larry Gene Bell's own voice filled the air, reading the words he had once whispered to a terrified family. "I, the one that killed her." A juror gasped. The facade of the anonymous predator was shattered by his own unmistakable voice. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts, including murder and kidnapping. As the judge read the sentence, death by electrocution, a quiet sob escaped from the family section. It was not a cry of celebration, but of profound, exhausted relief. The long nightmare was legally over. But the true climax, the moment that revealed the sheer depth of Bell's depravity, came not in the courtroom, but in the aftermath. Investigators, finally able to fully piece together his movements, uncovered his final, unspeakable act of cruelty. After murdering Tami Faye Brandon, Larry Gene Bell had taken her personal phone book. In the days following her disappearance, as her family was frantic with worry, he had systematically called every number in it. Posing as a detective, he would deliver the false, hopeful news that Tami had been found alive and well. He would then listen to the joyous, relieved reactions of her friends and family, savoring their temporary happiness before he would hang up, leaving them to eventually discover the devastating truth. This was not just murder. It was a prolonged psychological feast for a man who fed on the suffering of others. Larry Gene Bell was executed in the electric chair on October 4, 1996. He never confessed, never showed an ounce of remorse. He went to his death silent, taking the full, chilling truth of his motives with him. The story of the flat tire murders is a stark reminder that the most mundane misfortune can be a carefully laid trap, and that the face of evil isn't always a snarling monster. Sometimes it's the quiet, unassuming man next door, his mind a labyrinth of unspeakable fantasies. He used a flat tire as his lure, but his true weapon was the inherent trust we place in one another. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.